very much for joining me on Headstrong.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
How are you doing today?
Today, I'm doing good, actually.
Lovely.
Yeah, I'm on a roll with my current thing is just trying to really, it sounds very cliche, but sort of work on the things I want to improve and actually each week track that and see whether I can make changes.
Okay, what's the current goals?
The current goals are, I've got a very addictive personality and I'm really trying to log off a lot and not be on my phone until the end of a working day. And it's a really good goal to have because if you slip up for one day of it, it doesn't really matter. It's only yourself who sort of knows. But if you succeed in it, it's such a nice sense of fulfillment. And being present at work is just such a better experience. So yeah, it's making me enjoy my job more.
That's a really good goal, actually. I think, I suppose it's difficult in what I do, but yeah, having my phone there constantly is quite annoying. Maybe I need to use Do Not Disturb more.
Yeah.
I think that'd be good. Anyway, it's been over a year now since your documentary came out.
Yes.
On Bipolar, which is very cool. It's been just over the year anniversary. How do you reflect on that time? Like, I watched it on YouTube. It's got over 100,000 views, plus all the views that it would have had on Channel 4. That's a lot of eyes.
Yeah, it's a lot of people on it. It's so weird because I feel in such a different headspace to when we recorded it. And I think at the time I was in quite an unstable phase. I was modeling and knew deep down that it wasn't fulfilling me in the same way anymore. And it was sort of a catalyst to a lot of my lows and highs, which is just part of the job. But I guess when you've got bipolar, you're a bit more sensitive to it. So yeah, looking back, like I've only watched it twice since it came out. And that was often like prompted by a friend. And I just feel with something like bipolar, every high and every low teaches you something. And so a year's time feels a lot longer than a year because there's so many sort of lessons every few weeks which come with that mood capacity that, yeah, I feel like I'm looking at a baby when I watch that.
Do you feel like you've grown a lot more? As in, like, got better? I don't know. I mean, have you worked on yourself a lot more, or is it just one of those things where it's just kind of part of not growing up as such, but as you've got older?
Yeah, it's been a really stable year, which is really nice. And I think now speaking about mental health, it's a bit more of a conscious decision now because I'm not sort of grappling with this thing I don't understand. And since then I've been in a relationship and it didn't become much baggage, which was just the best thing for my confidence, where I was like, wow, if I meet people now, it's not this hidden part of my life, which is like taking over everything. It's been really nice to sort of live with it and feel I understand it and everything become a lot more manageable. So yeah, now it's just such a conscious decision to stay in this conversation and keep telling people that you can get a lot better. Because I think the easier thing when you become stable, you just think, oh my God, I just want to have a normal sort of life and enjoy not speaking about things as much. But it's finding that balance.
Since the documentary came out, is there something that stood out? Like, have a lot of people reached out and messaged you and almost thanked you, saying, highlighting something like this is so important?
Yeah, if I'm honest, I can't tell you how many people have sent probably the most personal message they've ever written to me, which at first was quite a lot. But if I said that it wasn't the most fulfilling project or thing I've ever done, I'd be lying. It sort of really reaffirmed how normal my whole experience was. And I think when someone in your family goes into a psych ward, for me, for my sisters, for my parents, that experience was like hushed and not spoken about. And I've had, honestly, hundreds of messages from people saying, oh my gosh, I've been sectioned 3 times. Like, how did you get out of this cycle? And even now, about twice a week, I'll get a message like this big on Instagram. So it puts you in a position to speak to people with the same experience. And I can't always reply, but I'll always read them. And it's just knowing other people out there are going through the same thing. It's a very weird feeling when you first find out you have it, you think you're like the only one.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been pretty magical, I won't lie.
It's feeling that, I guess it's a change from that feeling of isolation where it's like, oh, I'm really not the only one that's experienced this. I mean, they're obviously not identical experiences, these people that are reaching out, but as you say, they are people that have experienced something and found solace in what you brought to light, basically.
Yeah.
And I think that's really powerful to find almost like I know this is going to sound terrible, but like a tribe, like,
yeah.
you know, like a community where you feel you're not the only one.
Yeah. And I think there's something, I guess the experience of having bipolar especially bipolar 1, like being sort of exposed to that spiritual level for 3 months or so, you do come back down, and like life will never be the same again. And in some ways your episode is always going to be so important because it sort of rejigs your brain in a lot of ways. So it's just been fascinating to see how other people's life change after an episode. And a lot of the time I don't know what it is. Well, I sort of do, but you come into wanting to do something philanthropic, and it's just been so nice to connect with people who have that joint want to give back, because I wasn't in a community like that before this all happened.
Bipolar as a word is probably one of the most misunderstood words when it comes to mental health.
Yeah.
Can you please say to those listening and watching what bipolar is in its simplest terms, like, and what the most common misconceptions are about it?
Okay. Some people will probably listen to my description and sort of have different wording for it, because the language around it is so limited that sometimes you sort of have to just be confident in how you would describe it. But it's a mood disorder. So your mood goes between a much more extreme scale than someone else. So you'll have 0 to 10. 8 to 10 is this sort of manic state where you can have religious delusion. You'll think that you have greater powers than you really do. And it's like a very ill section where you might need to be sectioned just because you're a threat to yourself, if you sort of believe you can do things you can't. And then on the lower end, this suicidal low is very sort of in your breadth, and you can jump between the two. On medication, there's the sort of normal depression, and then hypomania, which is like an elated high, which I still have week to week or month to month. And it's slightly more manageable, but it still makes you make decisions you wouldn't make if you were sort of more balanced. Just that breadth and the jump between the two, which are mood swings, which can be high to low or low to high. And it's just sort of that change in state, which other people don't have, I guess.
Before we talk about your diagnosis, your experiences with it, when you were growing up and when you were younger, what did you yourself know about bipolar?
Do you know what? I actually had never had a conversation with friends about it. I was really thinking about this when I got diagnosed, because all I could think about was the weather. I was like, right, okay, so I'm being told at 22 that I'm going to experience being high all the time or low. And we used to call one teacher bipolar because he was really erratic and no one liked him. So I sort of associated it with being evil. And even like day to day, everyone will text me saying, sorry, I haven't replied, I had a manic morning. So we have that word in our language, and everyone attains it to being sort of really out of control and really stressful. And actually mania, which is what people with bipolar experience, is very stressful, but it's a natural sort of part of who we are. So yeah, my understanding has completely come after the diagnosis. There was no understanding whatsoever before.
So upon reflection, when you were growing up as a child, do you recall any times where you were experiencing mania, or where you experienced these dramatic mood swings where you go, okay, maybe upon reflection within myself, I know that maybe there was something else? And I don't want to ask about what anyone else said, but maybe in yourself, was there anything?
I knew something was weird because I started having highs at 16, and I've written a diary since I was 12. So if you read back around that time, it was this complete euphoria, and all I could do was write. I've always been a writer, but it would be like writing when you're on MDMA or something. Like, look, your language is so extreme and everything's so heightened. But there was definitely a year when I was living in New York in 2016, and I was living on my own a lot, and I was running half marathons. I was going out clubbing, and I would go sort of 4 days without sleeping. And I remember in that time lying to my mum about it. And that was just a moment where I thought, why can I not be honest with people about what's really going on? And I guess it's because I knew that everyone else would find that a weird behavior. So I sort of started keeping my highs secret, just thinking maybe again, slightly spiritual, that there was a reason it was happening. And I don't know, I didn't have the language to describe it. I just knew it wasn't socially normal.
Did you ever kind of look into it, or were you kind of like, as you say, you hid it from your mum and hid it from your people close to you? It was better to keep it to yourself?
Yeah. I think it was because at that age, like I was sort of 19, anything out of the normal I found embarrassing, whereas now I love to be abnormal and just connect with people who are slightly abnormal. But I think, yeah, at that time, I knew that telling people how far I'd run or how many days I hadn't stopped, that it would give them a weird impression of me. And I was just self-conscious and really cared what people thought, I guess. So
That's interesting. I suppose a lot of people at that age, I think, would also, some might even use that though in an arrogant way. They'd be like,
Yeah.
oh, I haven't slept in like 3 days.
yeah.
You know what I mean? But of course, there's the other side of it where it's like, well, I'm not going to say anything because people are going to be like, I'm weird. You know?
I thought I was a bit weird. I did think I was a bit weird, especially with the sort of highs which would come from such small things.
Like, can you give me an example?
I think, we spoke earlier about having a mutual friend. When I was in junior school, I tried a Fanta fruit twist for the first time, and I wrote poems about it. I made a poster about it, and every time I discovered something I loved, I just had this crazy enthusiasm around it. And obviously it would be just the language of being high and having something you like. So then I think, again, with coffee, when I discovered that, when I was like in London more full time and in my first relationship, the sort of enthusiasm around it, it was just very bizarre to then go and write diary entries about my first flat white and stuff. It was just a bit of, there's just been a lot of those moments where I'm like, okay, you were high when you were experiencing that. And so it was such a heightened sort of first introduction to things.
Would you say then, even throughout your childhood, that you would feel more than other people? You know, you have an exaggerated experience of emotion.
Yes, especially with the depression and bipolar, like the nature of it is very suicidal. And that's something I've sort of got more confident speaking about, because I think now that my temperament is very upbeat and very close to my highs, that when I tell my friends, you know, it's so bad this week, it's a weird one, I think, for them to get their head around that low being so severe so quickly. And in sixth form, it was just really rough, and I just didn't have the language. None of my friends spoke about mental health, and I knew that I wasn't enjoying the school, but other people weren't, and still managing to function. Whereas I remember one pancake day, like actually not being able to sort of come out of my room to join in with everyone because I was physically in and out of sleep for 24 hours. And so, yeah, being more sensitive to others was just something me and my mum knew, but seeing a doctor just wasn't part of the conversation then.
Yeah,
Makes us sound old.
No, it's not. But again, that's
made
still
such a difference.
Exactly, in 10 years, the amount of difference there is. Do you think, upon reflection, if it happened now and you were still at school, that you would be speaking to a doctor almost immediately? Or, you know, there would have been action, or not?
Do you know what? I'd love to think that, because my friends and family are now quite educated about bipolar, but I still know that the average 18-year-old at school or whatever, we haven't quite reached mental illness in this conversation in the way it should be. With schizophrenia and bipolar, it's still like, I have to remember my reaction when I first found out about it, and it is this too weird to talk about thing, because it doesn't fit into anxiety and depression. So yeah, I still don't think that I would have questioned it or thought it was more than depression or opened up conversation, because I'm just not sure that kids who are 18 and 19 are educated on it yet.
I was going to say, what do you think the infrastructure looks like then in the educational system on mental health?
I think I need to find out.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I work with Bipolar UK a lot, and I think in the next year, like, a passion of mine would be to go to schools and sort of check in and see where it's going, because social media, my algorithm is now people who are very open about this, which is incredible. But again, someone will mention someone famous who's a singer I don't know, and they'll be shocked that I don't know them. And it just reminds you that your algorithm is things you're interested in. So I think it will be good to sort of jump out of my network and go to schools and sort of hear what's going on, because I'm not sure that it's evolved in the same way as this sort of London mental health community, which is so great to be a part of.
It's very easy to be in a bubble of an ecosystem, do you know what I mean? It's particularly in London, I think. So many people think not a lot exists outside of it. When actually I think someone like you going to schools with your experiences, and even if it was a workshop or talks or something, that's going to be something where they would, you know, I think that's very powerful. Yeah. Anyway.
This is going to keep me accountable to go back to my school.
Yeah. So I'll check in a year. No.
Yeah.
What I was going to ask is, well, we were talking about it earlier, that I had an interview with Alistair Campbell, and he investigated in his life, he's spoken to a number of doctors about mental illness being genetic. Do you think that that is something that is in your family? So is there a history of bipolar or schizophrenia or something?
Yeah, so I think, to be honest, I think my whole family, like a lot of us, cousins, siblings, parents, have dealt with mental health issues. I think with bipolar, you're sort of predisposed, so it can be triggered by your lifestyle. And I think I was, very sort of susceptible to it. My dad is neurodiverse, and I always describe him as someone who only has the highs. Like, his mood is very elated all the time, and I feel like I've got that from him. But then because of the modeling, which I did for 10 years, the jet lag, the excitement, the highs, the lows of sort of being confirmed for a massive show and then dropped the night before, I was constantly exposed to the highs and lows of that career. And so I think if I had gone to uni, I was originally going to do chemistry and history of art. If I had done that, I don't think I would have developed it. So I think I really am a believer that, in some families, I meet people who are bipolar and it's been for 3 generations there. I think in my case, I was going to have some sort of mental illness, but the bipolar came from being in such an unstable career.
Yes, I'm interested in this modelling. Firstly, I want to know, how did it come about? Were you spotted? Did you try and get into it? Tell me the narrative on that.
Basically, I was seeing a guy when I was 16. I've never been good with breakups, and he dumped me for a model. And I was like, I need to be a model. So then I just set my mind to it. And then I used to come up to London and wear really high boots and stuff and literally just hang around Topshop, Oxford Circus. When I get fixated on things, it's like nothing will stop me. And I was like, I need to be a model, And then I tried and I hung around and I tried to dress like one. And then I was in Camden once and someone came up to me when I wasn't trying, and that was sort of where it began. But yeah, I was going to get there. I put wooden doorstops in my shoes when I joined my agency because I was so determined to be tall.
Oh, wow.
So yeah,
as you say, it's an incredibly challenging industry. It's so full of rejection. It's so full of probably toxicity. I don't know that from experience, but from a surface level at the very least. How did you deal with rejection in that industry then?
Do you know what? I think I'm actually quite good at dealing with rejection as long as it's actually to my face. It's more that I'm so conscious of communication. So what I found difficult was if you didn't get a job but you didn't hear back. Whereas if I got a job and I heard straight away, sorry, you're not the right person for this, I think I was always okay with dealing with it in that sense. But it's definitely a difficult one because you don't have any control over your success. All you can really do is go to the gym and stay in a sort of model physique. But you can't revise or turn up to work and be a great person and that make a difference. At the end of the day, it just comes down to your appearance as to whether you're right for the brand. So I think for anyone who struggles with their mental health, I would say it's a really bad idea to be a model. But I don't regret it at all because I really enjoyed it until my episode. It was only coming back after that I found it difficult. Whereas before, I was quite lucky in that it didn't really affect my confidence for a while.
Is there something that you reflect on going, yeah, that was the highlight? Is there something that really stands out?
Yeah, I think it's just, I guess it's living abroad, and that sort of opportunity is so difficult in other industries. Like living in New York and having that visa, I think it was just such a surreal experience and such a sort of culture difference that it was just such a highlight to be able to do that. Because now that I feel more grown up, and if I was to look into a visa again, it's really difficult in other industries. So yeah, that was a highlight.
For sure. Now, you mentioned about, your father being neurodiverse and that understanding of mental health in your family. When did you first become aware of your own mental health?
When did I first become aware? Oh God. So when I was 15, I think that was the first time I noticed that I wasn't able to just deal with things in a normal way. A friend of mine at school had really bad anorexia, and I couldn't deal with it, and I had a breakdown. And I remember my mum being like, just leave it to the teachers to deal with it. But I think seeing her physically change so much and knowing that she was in pain, I had to take time off work, like off school. And seeing her faint once, like it sent me into a frenzy, and I was just very depressed as a result of her depression. So I think that was the first time I sort of noticed that my reactions were extreme. Quite young as well, 15 is young.
Wow, yeah.
At the time, obviously, I thought I was so old.
But it shows that again, it's that again, it came from a very heartfelt place, right? Because it's one of your closest friends, and you care. Ultimately, that's all that it is. That's really it must have been very challenging though, because you were probably unsure. Why am I? Were you self-aware enough of that, or?
I mean, I think I was just so stressed. I remember fainting a lot at the time. Like it was just such a physical reaction, and I guess it was just weird to sort of experience that so young and not be able to relate to my other friends who were like, oh, you know, just leave it to the teachers, leave it to her mum. Yeah, but again, mental health, even at 15, that was just not a conversation. So I just kept being called sensitive. Everyone just said, Rosie, you're so sensitive. You're so sensitive.
How did you react to that?
I mean, I couldn't disagree.
Of course, but again,
right
it's not okay. Of course, on a surface level, it's an accurate use of the word probably, but it's not. Doesn't help anything, does it?
No, I think it was more that then skipped to 22 and finding out I had bipolar. There was so much relief in that diagnosis because it explained so much of my behavior on a high and low end. I was like, finally, it's not, you know, because I knew that I had depression, but it was this part of my life which was very secretive because I'd flip out of it so quickly that by the time I told someone I was having a good day, everyone always questioned my lows. They were like, okay, well, maybe she just bailed last week because she was just bailer. Whereas now that I have this diagnosis, it's like, okay, Rosie really flips between the two.
It's well documented in the documentary itself, but I want to explore when you had that episode at the airport. Are you happy to talk about it?
Yeah, 100%.
So what happened at the airport exactly that led to this, basically the alarms going off, and if you're happy to kind of just go into kind of explaining that.
I mean, it was a pretty epic way to get diagnosed. I think basically the day that I was sectioned, I woke up and I was completely psychotic. So I hadn't been sleeping for about a week. I'd had a breakup 2 weeks earlier, and that had triggered this sort of massive episode. But I really thought that I was going to meet God that day. And it was weird because I'd grown up not religious. But I woke up on this morning and it was like certain that it was the day I was meeting God, just as much as I knew my name was Rosie. It was like God day. So got up, did a run at like 4 a.m, then set out to meet my friend for breakfast at 9. And I left at like 6. So I wasn't really like with it. Time was just very weird. And I had this flight in the afternoon at Stansted. So my day was my parents wanting me to join them on holiday because I was having obviously a bit of a breakdown, messaging them saying I was Jesus. So I left the house, I went to McDonald's at King's Cross, bought everyone breakfast on the street. I ran around, I don't know what time it was, but I nearly jumped off a roof, and then the roof, like the cafe owner jumped in, and it was just a really scary few hours where when you're manic, you lose all sense of reality. But somehow I made it to Stansted, even though I proposed to a guy at a bus stop that morning and kissed him. I think he still follows me on Instagram, but I might have had to block him. And then I got to Stansted, and when you're sort of in psychosis, everything is out of proportion. So like when I entered into Stansted Airport, the board saying where my flight was like as big as this room, and then you'd see people like this big, and it's just a very weird thing when you've trusted your vision your whole life for it not to make sense. So when I got there, I was constantly trying to like feel what God wanted me to do, and running around, kissed another man outside the loo who had a girlfriend next to him, so that wasn't ideal. And then tried to get on a flight to Iceland because I just was like, I don't know what flight I'm getting on. And the woman at British Airways was like, well, we've got Iceland and New York. And I was like, oh, which one should I do? Like completely not with it. And then I think when I called my mum to say I can't get on the flight, I don't know what I'm doing here. Am I getting a flight to see you? Like, what's going on? And also, am I engaged to a new guy from this morning? She sort of brought me back to reality, and it just freaked me out because I was like, wow, I've not met God. It's nearly 3 PM. I've been running around since 5. So I think it was sort of a crisis decision partnered with like an urge to always want to jump through baggage drop off. Just like, it's like unknown.
An
and it
impulsive.
thrilled me. And in that moment, I just thought, what the hell is going on? This must be a dream. So I just jumped through and then set off the fire alarm on my left. And then as soon as that went off, it was just this complete, like, I need help. And I think after a year of depression and anxiety, which was so severe, that was my way of being like, I need help. So it's quite a niche way to ask for help. Like, I could have just gone to the doctor, but that's what happened. And then I think being arrested straight away, like, I remember sitting in this room with like 6 police officers, and I was so high. I was just laughing and cracking really inappropriate jokes. And like, they kept telling me an ambulance was on its way, and it was just switching between reality and not reality. It was just a very weird day.
Wow.
And then I stayed awake for 3 days.
And where were you taken? Because this is when you were sectioned.
Yeah.
So where were you taken?
So initially I was taken to A&E near Stansted, I think. And I just remember that I couldn't sleep, and I was just eating all my family's food. My sister managed to get to the airport, get to A&E like a few hours later. And then my aunt arrived, and I was just really confused what she was doing there. I didn't really know what was going on. I was just like, why am I in a hospital? And why is everyone here looking so worried when I'm so high? And then 24 hours later, a bed came up in Ealing. And so my mum landed back, and we got another ambulance to Ealing Hospital. And then I was there for 3 months.
Do you remember, because I know that it's somewhat blurry to an extent, but do you remember how they were treating you? And what sort of language was being used?
Yeah, I mean, even when you're hypomanic, you're sensitive to people's energy, like very extremely. So in that mania, just the kindness of people working there was incredible. And I just remember even on some of my most manic days in hospital, where I'd be sort of like panicking, just not knowing who I was, and my vision was weird. That kindness just came so strongly, and I'll never forget that feeling of safety. So yeah, it's been the whole reason why I want to give back, because those people really saved my life and reassured me that things were going to be okay. When I think deep down, I thought, losing your mind is your biggest fear. And when it happens and you don't even know who your parents are for 2.5 weeks and things like that, that reassurance was just so obvious.
When it comes to something like mania, and when you are in such a state of high and euphoria, what's the process of trying to bring you back down, so to speak? Because they're trying to find that balance. Is that right?
Yeah.
So is there a process? There's not an instruction manual, obviously. So how's that? It's different person to person as well. So what's that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you didn't treat it, not that that's like allowed in society. Like if you have a manic episode, you're not really allowed to live it out. Not that I would, but you are given antipsychotics straight away. And I remember that first day being pinned down, and they injected it in the back of my leg because I was too manic to like take pills or anything. And I remember the first time I recognized my parents being like, they are giving me cocaine. And I was convinced that they were giving me cocaine, which is why I felt like this. But those antipsychotics take about 8 weeks to kick in, or 6 weeks. So for a long time, it's just a waiting game. And there was a few days where I was put in seclusion because my mania was so physical and I was screaming and crying that I had to just be in a room with no windows, not exposed to any other patients, because I was just a bit too triggering for other people, I guess. But yeah, it's just a waiting game with medication. So.
Wow. And you now still take medication, don't you?
Every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't missed it. Actually, I missed it once about 6 months ago, and I was so high the next day that I just thought, for the sake of my family and friends who've also, it's been quite traumatic for everyone involved, not just me. I'm just religious with it.
And it's also just a lot of people who take antidepressants, for example, to deal with depression and or anxiety. There's this kind of stigma behind medication in general, but without it, you're almost, as you say there, not only would you be potentially harming yourself. But it's, you know, you'd be bringing in so many people in your life that is, I don't want to say not fair, but makes things a little very complicated, you know?
I think it's just, I once spoke to a guy very early on, and he'd had 2 psychotic episodes. And he said, you know, as soon as you miss your medication for a few days, you get that high and you think, okay, I can do without this. I don't need it. And he was like, you'll never be able to capture it. And every time, if you have a psychotic episode, it affects your career. It's time off work. Socially, it's really difficult to come back from. And I just can't go through it again. I just can't do that low ever again. So I think it's just a commitment to yourself.
And as you said, it followed with 6 months of depression. How did you overcome that in terms of what else other than medication were you doing? So how much therapy were you doing and all these lovely things?
Do you know what? It's a really weird thing where I've never really spoken to friends about what that process looked like, because you're off work and everyone, I think, thinks you're just waiting for medication. But when I first came out of hospital, I was in contact with a team in Westminster called the Early Intervention Psychosis Team. And I had to see them 3 times a week. So it was like Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So you're seeing doctors more than friends. You're also isolating from friends because of the depression. So it's this weird thing where like bipolar is your life, but it's also your first experience of bipolar. So I think that's why the low was so intense, because you're like, is this my life now? Is it going to be 3 doctor's appointments a week? Like, what job can I do these appointments with? You're just sort of like, God, this is really the end of the world. And then it sped up a bit to home visits when I was really suicidal. I had the choice to be sectioned again or have people come to my house twice a day. And I went for the twice a day just purely out of fear that if I went back to hospital, it would just make things worse. But yeah, it was a really tough time, and it's just so mad. Now I see a 22-year-old. I just feel so much empathy for people that age going through something so extreme, because you're so young.
Speaking of empathy then and understanding, what has that journey been like since your diagnosis with friends and family?
God, everyone's been amazing. I think it's still a difficult thing to speak to about friends and family sometimes, because everyone who speaks to you about it speaks to you in a hushed voice. And it's this sort of like, oh, you know, my friend's sister got sectioned as well. And that tone, I'm really trying to shift it with friends and family, and they're being amazing about it. But it's difficult, I think, because you just want to blend in and you want to be normal, but then you're so passionate about this experience no one in your life can relate to. And yeah, that spiritual aspect connects me to people with it much easier than my friends and family sometimes.
Yeah, prior to meeting you, I wasn't sure the tone of how you'd talk about it. And it's interesting because you'll say things and you're now reflecting on it and you'll laugh about this thing and and like you've got to actually not treat it in this, you know, very serious. Yes, of course. In the grand scheme of things, if you're a medical expert, yes, it is a serious thing where it needs to be managed. But actually, you've experienced it and you're not in it now. And actually, there are things where you go, yeah, that totally is something I can laugh at. Yeah. And if you don't treat it like that, then
I think you need to, because like I would say that I've got back to my baseline and that I'm stable. And it's a funny word to use. Like, stable for someone with bipolar is different from stable to someone else, in that I still have hypomania and depression. But that to me is manageable again. It's not to the level where I need intervention from other people to help. But honestly, it's the most hilarious thing when you really think about the fact that you've got to manage a high, not at a festival, but going into the office on a Monday and keep it to the point where no one notices. It's quite hilarious some days having to live that out, and that hasn't gone away yet, the weirdness of it. Like, it's a learning process, and definitely very character building, I guess.
Yeah, you've talked about this level of a scale, I suppose, and I suppose when it's very low, you have these suicidal thoughts. What would you say to somebody who is experiencing that, and they may well not have bipolar, but what would you say to a young individual who's experiencing suicidal thoughts, but scared and reluctant and anxious to reach out?
I think the best piece of advice my mum gave me when I was in that space was like, you don't need to sort this out. You need to like lean on other people who can help and are in the headspace to help. When you're in that position, you feel this responsibility that you're not able to keep a hold on it, and it's your fault for feeling so bad. Whereas I think once I actually accepted help and saw it as this thing I'd constantly need to accept into my life, that became much easier. Sort of taking my illness seriously made it much more easy to cope. And whether that's taking medication at the end of the day, whether that's doing therapy when you need it, it's just accepting you're not going to be able to get yourself out of this alone. Like, it's a collaborative thing. So yeah, that would be my advice.
That's really nice. You've talked about the spirituality of this episode as well. And you said as well that you weren't religious beforehand, you weren't religious growing up.
Yeah.
What's that relationship like now with spirituality and religion? Has that stayed? Has that been a through line? I'm curious to know.
I'm so not used to speaking openly about those thoughts, just because I don't want my friends and family to think I should be sectioned again. But it's just been, I'm just so much more open-minded now. And I think when I first came out of hospital for a year, I was sort of seeking out, I was going to the Buddhist Centre in Bethnal Green. I was sort of popping my head in at church and trying to listen to those thoughts and respect them rather than thinking I was myself crazy. Whereas I think now what I've realized is it's just this overwhelming feeling I have when I'm high of like appreciating the power of love. So I'm more trying to take that feeling of importance into my own relationships in my life rather than it be this thing outside of my control.
Something that you're very passionate about is fitness.
Yeah.
And you've done that, well, from what I can see, for a very long time. Why is it that fitness is something that is such a consistent part of your life?
I think when I was younger, I definitely had OCD tendencies. And I think I can be quite good at putting things in my routine and being quite regimented about it. And it's just one of those really nice things where you're sort of living with something which is uncontrollable at times. And running's in my control, and I've never regretted a run. So I just, knowing that, find it easy to always get out and do it. And I think teaming it up with music, which is like my biggest love, I've managed to just associate it always as a positive thing. And I think I've never been someone where exercise has been something I've had to do. It's been something I've associated with, helping me manage from quite a young age, these sort of energy levels and positive thoughts which come with it. I just think it's such a gift.
Is there anything else that you do? I mean, so I guess music is one of them, but how do you explore that passion of music?
Classical power naps. It's really good. Like, if I'm ever feeling overwhelmed, I'll just put on classical music for 20 minutes and lie down and just let it sort of change my state and let it make me feel relaxed and inspired. Yeah, otherwise it's just, I love that it can change your mood. I really believe music can. And when you have a mood disorder and you need lifting or you want to sit with a headspace, I do use it a lot to sort of for a purpose.
When you meet people, I know that you've said that you will say to them, and you're going to be upfront, you say, by the way, or not, maybe not quite like the way I said, but you have bipolar and you want to be open and honest.
Yeah.
What's that experience like for the first time? Do you get a lot of judgment? Do you get a lot of understanding? How do people take such a kind of piece of information?
Yeah. Do you know what? It's different. Like, recently I've been trying to meet new people, and even a year ago, I would always mention, like, on a first date that I have bipolar, whereas actually right now I don't really want to mention it. And I'm just sitting with that a bit because I want people to get to know me and then learn about it, rather than, I think I just had some experiences in the past where I would mention it. They'll make an association in their mind with someone they know with it. 9 times out of 10 people with this aren't holding down like a job very easily, or they're really, really struggling. So I think in the past it's taken them to a place of worrying about me. So
and also
now,
you don't want it to be your defining characteristic, because it's not.
No, I think especially, that's been the hugest difference in the last year, is meeting people now. I would say that I'm sort of in the mental health world, but it's sort of irrelevant, my own story, unless it comes up and I can in some way relate to them and then talk about it.
And what about not drinking? Because it's such a huge part of English culture. But when you say to people, oh, I don't drink, do you get the, oh, come on, just have one? But then you've got to be like, well, no.
Do you know what? I do drink.
Oh, you do now?
Yeah, I mean, it comes in phases. Like, I have to see how I am in that time. So over Christmas, I was having a low, which was horrendous being low on Christmas. Like, you actually feel like the biggest Grinch ever, because it's so annoying that you can appreciate it's your perfect day in a good headspace, but when you can't see that, you really have to be like, okay, I'm not good. So like over Christmas I didn't drink, and then in January I got back into it. And because of what I manage, I can't be black and white about these things, but I genuinely do love both. I think it's just like making the most of each opportunity. And with some friends, I love to drink alcohol and go out. And with others, I love to share like a non-alcoholic cocktail and talk about that and be in that headspace. So yeah, I guess because I have both ends of the spectrum, with things like alcohol, it's sort of a changing conversation rather than a set sort of routine.
I want to touch on dating if we can, because are you happy to talk about it?
Yeah,
So,
anything.
Yeah, if we have to.
No, it's such an open book.
No, in terms of dating, in the documentary, that you had this fear ultimately of if you went through another breakup, because of the way you feel, you had this anxiety and fear of another episode.
Yeah.
How did you manage that in your latest experience, if you're happy to explain?
Yeah, of course. Do you know what? It's been such a like, weirdly, as hard as a breakup has been, it's been such a celebration of health, my recent one. First of all, because I think it was a really healthy friendship. So there wasn't this sort of, it didn't hurt me after in that I'd been hurt as a person. It was just the way the world wanted things to be. So yeah, I went high for like 6 weeks, which was fine. But then instead of crashing and having like a low episode, I've sort of just had a normal sadness after a breakup. But yeah, in that 6 weeks high, I just knew it wasn't going to escalate if I took my medication. So it's nice to go through something which has previously been your biggest trigger to this like huge euphoria and 2 years off work, to this time knowing that I've learned my illness better and knowing how to cap that feeling and take sleeping pills and not drink and things like that. So yeah, it's been a positive experience on the whole, which is, from when something sad really happens, it's just been the best silver lining to be able to focus on that.
Do you get anxious about dating because of your ability to feel?
Do you know what? No, weirdly. Maybe a few years ago, I think when I first got my diagnosis, I was like, oh God, because I didn't understand it. I couldn't really explain it. Whereas now, if I met someone, because I've been so lucky to speak to so many people with this, I've learned a lot about bipolar, not just from my perspective. So I don't really get worried about dating with it at all. I think I would if secretly I was struggling with lows and highs all the time. But now it's like more occasional.
Okay, what about apps? Dating apps. What's your thought on this? As kind of, you're 27, going on 28, dating apps, and it's a strange transactional process, really.
Yeah.
Are you like, is that something that you have used? Like, would you?
I think it's great. I think it's really great because for my character, and probably for the character of someone I go for, I really nurture my friendships and my family relationships. So I don't easily break out of that into new sort of pathways of meeting people. With my supper clubs and my charity events, obviously I meet new people all the time, but I do quite like being placed in front of someone where there's no strings attached, because then if it doesn't go well, I can send like a little message being like, sorry, I just didn't feel anything. Which is, yeah, how I end things. It's always quite a, maybe quick to the point.
Well, yeah, at least you're honest.
You can't do that if it's like a friend's mate.
Yes,
so,
very true,
yeah.
very true. What advice would you give to a young woman dating in London at the moment?
Oh my God. Do a second date without alcohol.
I think that's good.
Yeah,
I think that's a good approach.
Because that's most of the time what you're going to be spending with someone if it works out. So that would be my advice.
Something about living in London, because you've just moved back.
Mm-hmm.
Does that? I mean, I'm getting the impression that you're one of these people that you're actually not overstimulated, but actually it's great because there's so much going on. Yeah. Is that a good thing?
Do you know what? When I was sort of recovering from my episode, thinking about changing careers, I found London the hardest place to be ever, just because everyone is so busy that if you're not in that busy rat race, you're like waiting for your friends to be free in the evening or free at lunch. and I found it really isolating. But I think now that I have a job which is sort of part of that world, and every day is so busy and my day off is so busy and then the weekend is social, I really like it because I feel part of that pattern. But yeah, I think I'll definitely end up in the countryside where I grew up.
Definitely.
Like, I just feel so at peace in that place.
Posting your crazy cat videos.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just going to be a cat mum, to be honest.
What about, like, there's this huge anxiety with young people with the cost of living crisis at the moment.
Okay.
And in terms of, you know, the idea of buying a house, you know, I feel this societal pressure that I need to be buying a house when actually it doesn't bother me at all. I don't care. But a lot of these people feel this weight of, you know, societal expectation. What do you think of that? And what would you say to somebody kind of who feels like they're being judged by society?
Yeah, I think it's just remembering that London is such a bubble, and out of London, so many people make that step and buy a flat or a house because it is the done thing. Whereas with London, you're sort of, even though you're spending a lot on rent and not reaching that point, you're having this experience where you can just hop on a tube and see someone so easily. And I think we're just not our parents' generation. And it's so good to sort of remind yourself of that. And I'm such a believer in like enjoying the money you make and taking holidays or spending a weekend out of London. So it's just not as important. I think it's like an ego thing. We want to be like, I have a mega house. But, I mean, maybe I will have a mega house and I'll feel good about it. But currently, I'm not sure it's that important.
Hey, Rosie, I really enjoyed this, but I ask my guests a question every time at the end.
Okay.
What does the word headstrong mean to you?
Do you know what? I was so flattered to be asked to be on a podcast with the word headstrong in. For me, it associates to being sure of yourself. So, like, that is, for me, when I feel most confident is when I know what my belief is on a topic of conversation or in a relationship or anything. So, yeah, I would say headstrong is when you are sure that your decision is authentic to you.
I love that. Thank you. Hey, Rosie, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.